Have you ever felt the sting of misjudging someone based on appearances alone? Today's story delves deep into this painful human tendency, but carries within it a powerful message about dignity, compassion, and the transformative nature of seeing beyond our assumptions. What you're about to read might change how you look at every stranger you encounter from this day forward. The evening shift at Riverside Diner always brought a particular rhythm that Olivia Bennett had grown accustomed to over her 3 years of employment. At 24, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her navy blue uniform pressed despite the long hours, she moved with practiced efficiency between tables. The small family restaurant sat on the corner of Maple and 7th, its large windows offering views of the city streets where life rushed by in a blur of headlights and hurried footsteps. "Order up for table 7, called Mr. Reynolds, the aging cook who'd become something of a father figure to Olivia since she'd started working there to pay her way through nursing school. "Got it," she replied, balancing the tray with practiced ease, her mind already calculating which tables needed refills and which checks needed processing. It was Wednesday, which meant the dinner rush would taper off earlier than usual. The autumn air had turned crisp, and through the windows, Olivia could see leaves skittering across the pavement in the golden glow of streetlights. 7 more hours until she could go home, review her anatomy notes, and perhaps get 6 hours of sleep before her morning class. The bell above the door chimed, and Olivia turned, expecting to see another customer seeking warmth and comfort food on this chilly evening. Instead, she froze, tray still in hand. He stood in the doorway, hesitating at the threshold, as if unsure whether to step forward or retreat. His beard was unkempt, streaked with grey despite eyes that suggested he might be younger than his weathered appearance indicated. The olive-green jacket he wore hung loose on his frame, frayed at the edges and stained from years of wear. Beneath it, a simple grey shirt stretched across his chest, and worn jeans, torn at the knees, completed the picture of a man who carried his life's hardships on his very person. Conversations dimmed. A few patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mr. Stevens, a regular who always ordered the meatloaf special, made a show of checking that his wallet was secure in his back pocket. "Can I help you?" Olivia asked, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet diner. The man's eyes met hers, and something in them, a flicker of dignity perhaps, or weary resolve, caught her by surprise. "I was wondering," he began, his voice softer and more articulate than she had expected, "if you might have any work available, just for an hour or two, sweeping up perhaps, or washing dishes." Before Olivia could respond, Gerald Wilson, the restaurant manager, emerged from the back office. At 47, with thinning hair and perpetually furrowed brows, Gerald had mastered the art of removing undesirables without creating scenes that might disturb the paying customers. "Sir, I'm afraid we're fully staffed," Gerald said, moving to position himself between the stranger and the dining area. "There's a shelter on 12th Street that might be able to help you." The man nodded, a barely perceptible movement. "Thank you for your time," he said, turning to leave. Something twisted in Olivia's chest. The dinner rush was over, and she had just served her last table. The tray in her hands held a turkey sandwich, side salad, and cup of coffee that had been ordered by a businessman who'd left abruptly after receiving a phone call, leaving behind both his meal and enough cash to cover it. "Wait," she called, hurrying toward the door. "Sir, please wait." The man paused at the entrance, the night air swirling around him. Olivia extended the tray. This meal was paid for but not eaten. It would just go to waste otherwise. "Please, take it." For a moment she thought he might accept. His eyes lingered on the food, and she saw his hand twitch slightly at his side. But then he straightened, something resolute settling in his expression. "That's very kind," he said, "but I can't accept." Olivia blinked in surprise. "I don't understand. You don't have to pay. It's already been taken care of." "It's not about payment," he said quietly, "but thank you for your kindness." With that, he stepped back into the night, leaving Olivia standing in the doorway, confusion and an inexplicable sense of loss washing over her. "Well, that was different," remarked Tina, another waitress, as she sidled up beside Olivia. "Usually they take whatever they can get." Olivia turned, still holding the tray. "He seemed different somehow." "They all have stories," Tina shrugged, already moving back to her section. "Can't save them all, honey." But as Olivia returned to the kitchen with the untouched meal, she couldn't shake the image of the man's eyes, not desperate or demanding, but dignified, despite everything. The next morning dawned grey and threatening, heavy clouds promising rain that would further chill the October air. Olivia rushed into her 7 o'clock anatomy class with seconds to spare, sliding into her seat just as Professor Daniels began his lecture on the cardiovascular system. But her mind kept drifting to the strange encounter from the night before. Why would someone who clearly needed a meal refuse one freely offered? The question followed her through her classes and into her afternoon shift at the diner. The bell chimed just after 3 o'clock, and Olivia looked up to see the same man from the previous night. He stood straighter today, his eyes scanning the nearly empty restaurant before settling on her. "Hello again," he said, remaining by the door. "Hello," Olivia replied, approaching slowly. "Can I help you with something?" "I wanted to explain," he said, "about yesterday. I didn't want you to think I was ungrateful." Before she could respond, Gerald emerged from the back, his expression hardening when he spotted the visitor. "Sir, unless you're a paying customer." "He's with me, Gerald," Olivia interjected quickly. "My break just started. 15 minutes, okay?" Gerald hesitated, then nodded curtly. 15 minutes. "And you stay at the front table where I can see you." The man followed Olivia to a small table near the window. Up close, she could see that his face, though weathered, retained handsome features beneath the beard. His hands, when he placed them on the table, were clean despite his circumstances, the nails trimmed. "I'm Olivia," she offered. "David," he replied. "David Thorne." "Why did you come back, David?" He looked out the window for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "Because kindness deserves an explanation." His gaze returned to her. "I couldn't take your food yesterday because it wasn't just for me." Olivia leaned forward slightly. "I don't understand." "There are 7 of us," David explained, "living under the railway bridge on 17th Street. An elderly couple. The husband has dementia, the wife won't leave him. A young woman who aged out of foster care with nowhere to go. A veteran who can't stand in closed spaces after what he saw overseas, and 2 others who've simply fallen through the cracks of a system not designed to catch everyone." He paused, a shadow passing over his features. "We look out for each other, share what we have. I couldn't take food just for myself when they would have nothing." Olivia felt something shift inside her, a perspective tilting like earth after a tremor. "You could have taken it to share. 1 meal split 7 ways. A few bites each would only emphasize what we lack," David said. "Sometimes dignity is worth more than a partial meal." "What about today?" Olivia asked. "Are you hungry today?" A small smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Today I came to say thank you, not to ask for anything more." "Why don't you stay?" The words surprised Olivia as much as they seemed to surprise David. "I mean, for a proper meal. On me." David shook his head. "I didn't come here for charity." "It's not charity," Olivia insisted. "It's conversation. I'd like to hear more about your community, the people you look after." Something in David's expression softened. "They look after me as much as I look after them. That's what community means." Their conversation was interrupted by a crash from the kitchen, followed by a string of colorful expletives from Mr. Reynolds. Gerald sighed dramatically before disappearing through the swinging doors to investigate. "I should go," David said, rising from his chair. "Wait." Olivia reached for her purse and pulled out her tip money from the previous day, $43. "Not a fortune, but enough. Please take this. Not for you, for everyone. For your community." David stared at the offered money, conflict evident in his eyes. "Think of it as an investment," Olivia said, in dignity, for 7 people. After a long moment, David accepted the money with a nod that conveyed both gratitude and a promise. I'll make sure it serves them well. As he turned to leave, Olivia called after him, Will you come back? Tell me how everyone's doing. David paused at the door, considering. Perhaps, he said finally. Thank you, Olivia. The door closed behind him, the bell chiming softly in his wake. That evening, the first drops of rain began to fall as Olivia arrived for her night shift. By 7 o'clock, the gentle patter had transformed into a relentless downpour that sent people scurrying for shelter and drastically reduced the number of diners willing to venture out. Going to be a slow night, Tina remarked, reapplying her lipstick in the reflection of a serving tray. Maybe Gerald will let us go early. Not likely, Olivia replied, watching rainwater cascade down the windows in rivulets that distorted the world outside. Her thoughts drifted to David and the others beneath the railway bridge. Were they staying dry? Did they have anywhere to go on a night like this? As if summoned by her thoughts, the door burst open, bringing with it a gust of wind and rain. And David, soaked to the skin, his green jacket darkened by water, his hair plastered to his forehead. "David!" Olivia exclaimed, hurrying toward him with a clean dishcloth. "You're drenched!" "What happened?" "The storm," he said between breaths. "It's worse than they predicted. The river is rising fast. The area under the bridge, it's flooding. Everyone's evacuating, but there's nowhere for people to go. The shelters are already overflowing." Gerald emerged from the back, his face clouding when he spotted David. "Now, listen here." "Gerald, please," Olivia interrupted, turning to face her manager. "Something's happening with the storm. Just listen to what he has to say." Reluctantly, Gerald fell silent, his expression still skeptical. "The railway bridge on 17th, David continued. "It's acting like a dam. Debris is piling up against it. The water's backing up into the tunnels and drainage systems. This whole area could flood within hours." "And how exactly would you know that?" Gerald challenged. David straightened, water dripping from his clothes onto the linoleum floor. "Because before I was homeless, I was a hydrological engineer for the city. I worked on those very systems for 12 years. A murmur rippled through the few patrons present. Olivia saw something shift in Gerald's expression, not quite belief, but perhaps the seed of doubt. "Even if that's true," Gerald said, "what do you expect us to do about it?" "This restaurant sits on higher ground than most buildings in the area," David explained. "It could serve as a temporary shelter. And you have food, clean water, bathrooms, essentials that will be in short supply very soon." "You want me to turn my restaurant into a homeless shelter?" Gerald scoffed. "Based on your word alone?" The door chimed again, and a police officer stepped inside, shaking water from his hat. "Evening, folks. Just making the rounds to warn businesses in the area. The river's breached its banks upstream. We're advising people to move to higher ground as a precaution." Gerald's face paled. "How bad is it going to get?" "Hard to say," the officer replied. "Emergency services are stretched thin tonight. Just be prepared for anything." As the officer left, Gerald turned back to David, his skepticism now tinged with fear. "All right, so maybe there's some truth to what you're saying, but I can't just—" "Look!" cried a customer, pointing through the window. Outside, water was beginning to pool on the street, no longer flowing into the overwhelmed storm drains, but instead creeping up over the curbs. "It's happening faster than I thought," David said grimly. "We need to act now." The following hours unfolded in a blur of activity. Despite Gerald's initial reluctance, the reality of the situation quickly became impossible to ignore as the waters continued to rise. The restaurant, situated on a slight elevation, remained dry while surrounding buildings began to take on water. Word spread through emergency channels, and soon Riverside Diner transformed into an impromptu crisis center. Tables were pushed against walls to create space. The kitchen operated continuously, with Mr. Reynolds directing volunteers in preparing simple meals that could feed many. Large pots of soup, trays of sandwiches, urns of coffee. Olivia worked alongside David, who had shed his sodden jacket to reveal the simple grey t-shirt underneath. Around his neck, she noticed for the first time a small pendant, what appeared to be a tarnished silver weather vane hanging from a leather cord. His knowledge proved invaluable as he coordinated with emergency services, predicting which areas would flood next based on his intimate understanding of the city's water systems. People began to arrive, first a trickle, then a steady stream. Families with wide-eyed children clutching stuffed animals, elderly couples supporting each other, singles and groups, all displaced by the rising waters, and among them, David's community from beneath the bridge. The elderly couple he had mentioned, Martha and Harold, she learned, clung to each other, Harold's eyes vacant but Martha's sharp with worry. The young woman, Jessie, no more than 19, helped guide a middle-aged man with a pronounced limp, Keith, the veteran David had spoken of. "You brought them," Olivia said, handing David a towel for the newcomers. "They're the reason I came here in the first place," he replied. "I knew this would be safe ground." As the night wore on, the restaurant filled to capacity. The rain continued its assault, drumming against the roof in a constant barrage. Outside, the streets had transformed into shallow canals, the water reflecting the emergency lights of distant service vehicles. It was past midnight when Olivia, exhausted from hours of continuous service, found David standing by the window, staring out at the transformed landscape. "You should rest," she told him, offering a cup of coffee. "You've been going non-stop since you arrived." David accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. "I'll rest when everyone is safe." "They are safe," Olivia insisted, "thanks to you. If you hadn't warned us—" "I didn't do it alone," David said, his gaze finding hers. "You believed me when you had every reason not to." A commotion near the entrance drew their attention. A man in a drenched business suit had just entered, assisted by 2 volunteers. As they helped him to a chair, his eyes locked on David, widening in shock. "David? David Thorne? My God, is that really you?" David tensed, recognition and something like dread crossing his features. "Hello, Robert." The man, Robert, struggled to his feet despite the volunteers' protests. "Everyone thought you were dead or had left the country after what happened with Sarah and Emily." David's hand moved to the weather vane pendant, clutching it as if it were a lifeline. "I'm still here," he said simply, "just not where anyone thought to look." Robert approached cautiously, as if David might disappear if he moved too suddenly. "The department fell apart after you left. No one understood the systems like you did." He gestured to the flooded streets outside. "We could have used your expertise tonight." "You're using it now," Olivia interjected, stepping closer to David protectively. Robert's gaze shifted to her, then back to David. "She's right. The evacuation routes, the shelter locations, they're all based on your old contingency plans, the ones the city never fully implemented because of budget cuts." A small, bitter smile touched David's lips. "Some lessons have to be learned the hard way, it seems." "David," Robert began, his voice lowering, "about what happened with the inquiry, with how the department handled everything." "That's in the past," David cut him off firmly. "Right now, we have more immediate concerns." As if to emphasize his point, the lights flickered ominously, plunging the restaurant into momentary darkness before the emergency generator kicked in with a dull roar. "The power substation must be compromised," David said, immediately shifting back to crisis mode. "We need to conserve energy, set up a rationing system for the generator." Robert nodded, falling naturally back into what must have been their old dynamic. "I'll coordinate with emergency services, see what the timeline looks like for assistance." As Robert moved away, Olivia touched David's arm gently. "Who is he?" "My former deputy," David replied, his expression unreadable. "From another life." Before Olivia could press further, a sharp cry came from near the restrooms, a child's voice high with panic. "Toby? Toby, where are you?" A woman's voice, frantic. David was moving before Olivia could react, pushing through the crowd toward the sound. She followed, arriving to find a woman clutching a small stuffed lion, her eyes wild with fear. "My son!" she gasped when she saw Olivia's uniform. "He was right beside me, and then the lights went out, and when they came back on—" "When did you last see him?" David asked, his voice calm but urgent. "Just before the blackout. He said he needed to use the bathroom, but now he's not there." "How old is he?" David continued, already scanning the crowded space. 7. He's 7 years old. Dark hair, blue dinosaur t-shirt. A crash from the kitchen interrupted her, followed by shouts and the sound of rushing water. "The back door has given way," someone yelled. "Water's coming in." David turned to Olivia, decision crystallizing in his eyes. "Get everyone to the front of the restaurant. Use tables as barriers if you need to slow the water. I'll find the boy." "David, wait!" But he was already moving, pushing against the tide of people now flowing away from the kitchen area. Olivia wanted to follow, but the increasing urgency of the situation demanded her attention elsewhere. With Gerald and Mr. Reynolds, she began directing people toward the slightly elevated dining area at the front, away from the encroaching water. Minutes stretched into a quarter hour. The water level inside the restaurant rose slowly but steadily, now ankle-deep near the kitchen. Of David and the missing boy, there was no sign. "The drainage access," Robert said suddenly, appearing at Olivia's side. "There's a maintenance tunnel that runs behind this block. If the boy wandered out the back somehow." The implication hung in the air between them. If the tunnels were flooding, as David had predicted. "He went after him," Olivia said, the realization like ice in her veins. "David went into the tunnels." Robert's face paled. "Those systems would be death traps right now. The water pressure alone." A shout from outside cut him off. Through the windows they could see emergency workers in a small boat navigating the flooded street. And in the boat, huddled under an emergency blanket, a small figure in a blue dinosaur shirt. "Toby!" The boy's mother pushed past Olivia, pressing herself against the window, relief and confusion warring on her face. "But how?" The rescue workers helped the boy from the boat to the restaurant entrance, where he was immediately enveloped in his mother's desperate embrace. "The man found me," the boy said, his voice small but steady. "I got scared when the lights went out and ran outside. Then the water came so fast. But the man knew where to go. He carried me to the big pipe where it was dry, then to the fireman." "What man, sweetheart?" his mother asked, brushing wet hair from his forehead. "The man with the star around his neck," Toby replied. "He told me to be brave, that help was coming." Then he went back to find others. Olivia's hand flew to her mouth. The weather vane pendant. David had gone back into the flood zone. The remainder of the night passed in tense vigilance. The rain gradually subsided, though the floodwaters receded much more slowly. Emergency services established more formal evacuation protocols, and by dawn, many of the restaurant's temporary residents had been relocated to official shelters or returned to homes on higher ground. Of David, there was still no sign. His community from beneath the bridge remained at the restaurant, unwilling or unable to leave. Martha kept watch by the window, her husband's head resting on her shoulder as he dozed. Jesse paced restlessly, while Keith sat stone-faced, his military training evident in his rigid posture. "He's survived worse," Keith told Olivia when she brought him coffee. "Don't count him out yet." But as morning brightened into full day, even their steadfast belief began to waver. Robert, who had remained to help coordinate with city services, grew increasingly somber. "The tunnels would have been completely submerged by midnight," he admitted to Olivia in a quiet moment. "No one could have—" The door chimed. Every head turned. In the entrance stood David, or what remained of him. His clothes were caked with mud and debris. A gash across his forehead had bled freely, leaving trails of dried blood down one side of his face. He swayed slightly on his feet, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. But he was alive. Olivia reached him first, supporting him as his legs threatened to give way. Others quickly joined her, helping David to a chair, offering water, blankets, first aid. There were others, he managed between gulps of water, trapped in the basement of the apartment building on Elm. Emergency services are with them now. You should have waited for help, Robert admonished, though there was no real heat in his words, only wonder and something like respect. David's hand went to his neck, finding only bare skin where the pendant should have been. A flash of pain crossed his features, more acute than his physical injuries. "Emily's vein," he murmured. "It must have—" "The boy has it," Olivia said quickly. "Toby. He said you gave it to him to be brave." Relief softened David's expression. It served its purpose then. As a paramedic examined David's injuries, declaring them numerous but not life-threatening, Olivia found herself standing beside Robert, both watching the scene unfold. "What happened?" she asked quietly. "Before all this, I mean." "He mentioned Sarah and Emily." Robert sighed, the sound heavy with old regrets. "His wife and daughter. There was a flash flood, similar to this one but more localized. David had warned the city for years about inadequate drainage in that area, but budget cuts always took precedence over infrastructure improvements." He paused, the memory clearly painful. "Sarah was picking Emily up from swim practice when their car was caught in the surge. By the time emergency services reached them," he shook his head. David blamed himself, said if he'd been more insistent, fought harder for those improvements, they might have survived. "It wasn't his fault," Olivia protested. "No," Robert agreed, "but grief isn't rational. The department launched an inquiry, standard procedure after fatalities. But some officials used it as an opportunity to deflect blame, suggested David's assessments had been flawed. It was all politics, covering themselves. But for David, it was the final betrayal," Olivia finished, understanding dawning like a cold light. "He resigned before the inquiry concluded, disappeared completely. Some thought he'd taken his own life. I never imagined he was living on the streets all this time." Across the room, David was now sitting up straighter, some color returning to his face as he spoke with his community from beneath the bridge. Despite his bedraggled appearance, there was something undeniably commanding in his presence, a natural authority that even his circumstances couldn't diminish. "Will he be charged?" Olivia asked suddenly. "For trespassing in the tunnels." Robert looked at her sharply. "Charged? The man just saved lives using knowledge no one else had. If anything, the city owes him a debt of gratitude." He shook his head. "No, there won't be any charges, but there might be an offer." "What kind of offer?" "The kind that acknowledges mistakes were made," Robert said. "The kind that tries to make amends." 3 days later, the floodwaters had largely receded, leaving behind a muddy residue and the immense task of cleanup and recovery. Riverside Diner, having sustained minimal damage thanks to its elevation, reopened for limited service, though much of its inventory went to continuing relief efforts rather than regular business. Olivia arrived for her afternoon shift to find an unusual scene. In the corner booth, typically reserved for larger parties, sat David, clean-shaven, his hair trimmed, dressed in simple but new clothes. Across from him were Robert and a woman in a crisp business suit whom Olivia recognized from local news coverage of the flood, the city's emergency management director. Gerald, wiping down the counter with unusual vigor, caught Olivia's questioning look. "Been there for over an hour," he said, nodding toward the table. "Some kind of job offer, from what I've gathered. For David. Apparently the city suddenly realized they need someone who actually understands how water moves," Gerald replied, his tone dry but not unkind. "Funny how nearly drowning can change perspectives." Olivia watched the meeting from a distance, noting the intensity of the conversation, the way David occasionally shook his head, how the officials leaned forward earnestly in response. Eventually, the emergency director slid documents across the table, which David regarded for a long moment before finally picking up a pen. As the officials rose to leave, shaking David's hand with evident satisfaction, Olivia approached the table. "Congratulations seem to be in order," she said, smiling tentatively. David looked up, his expression a complex mixture of emotions. Without the beard, he appeared younger, though the lines around his eyes spoke of hardships not easily erased. "Consultant position," he said, "reviewing the city's flood mitigation systems. Temporary for now, but it's a start," Olivia finished for him. "Yes." David's gaze drifted to the window, where sunshine now replaced the torrential rains of days before. "A start. What about—" Olivia hesitated. "What about your community, the people under the bridge?" At this, David's expression lightened. "Part of the negotiation. The city's providing emergency housing vouchers, not a permanent solution, but it buys time to find something better." He paused. "Martha and Harold are being assessed for senior housing. Keith may qualify for veterans' benefits he never accessed. Jesse," he smiled slightly, "Jesse has agreed to consider community college. You negotiated all that before accepting the position?" "Dignity isn't just about refusing charity when it's wrong," David said, meeting her eyes. "Sometimes it's about accepting help when it's right. And sometimes it's about demanding the help others deserve." A small figure darted into the restaurant, bypassing the "Please wait to be seated" sign with the confidence of youth. Toby, the boy from the flood, scanned the diner until his eyes landed on David. His face broke into a wide grin as he rushed over. "Mom said we might find you here," Toby announced, his mother following more sedately behind him. In his hand he clutched something that caught the light, the weather-vane pendant. "You kept it safe," David observed, his voice gentle. Toby nodded solemnly. "You said it was special, that it would help me be brave." He extended his hand, offering the pendant back to its owner. "Did it belong to someone important?" David stared at the small silver object, memories clearly washing over him like another kind of flood. "My daughter," he said finally. "Emily. She gave it to me before she died. Said it would help me always find my way home." Toby's eyes widened. "Then you definitely need it back." "Actually," David said, his voice catching slightly, "I think it's found the right person. Someone brave enough to wear it." Or he reached out, closing Toby's fingers back around the pendant. "It's yours now." Tears welled in Toby's mother's eyes as she watched the exchange. "We can never repay you for what you did," she said. "You already have," David replied, nodding toward the pendant in Toby's hand, "by helping me remember what's important." Later, as the afternoon light slanted golden through the windows, Olivia found David still at the corner booth, nursing a cup of coffee as he reviewed the documents he'd signed earlier. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked. "On the house." David looked up, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Actually, I was thinking of ordering a proper meal. The turkey sandwich comes highly recommended, I hear." "One turkey sandwich," Olivia confirmed, returning his smile. "But on one condition." "What's that?" "That you share the story," she said. "The whole story, not just with me, but with everyone who wants to hear it. About finding purpose in helping others, about maintaining dignity when the world tries to strip it away, about rebuilding after losing everything." David considered this for a long moment, his fingers tracing the edge of the papers before him. "That's a steep price for a sandwich," he said finally, but his eyes held a warmth that belied his words. "Worth it, though," Olivia replied. "Some stories need to be told." As she turned to place his order, Olivia noticed that the other patrons in the restaurant, a mix of regulars and newcomers, had fallen unusually quiet, their attention drawn to the corner booth and the man whose refusal of a simple meal had set in motion events none of them could have predicted. "You know," Olivia said, pausing and turning back, "I think there are people who would like to hear that story right now." David followed her gaze, taking in the quietly attentive faces around him. For a brief moment she saw hesitation, the instinct to retreat that had served him for so long. Then slowly he nodded. "Once," he began, his voice gathering strength as he spoke, "I believed I had nothing left to give. That accepting help meant surrendering the last thing I still possessed, my dignity. What I didn't understand was that true dignity isn't found in refusing assistance, but in recognizing when accepting it allows you to help others in turn. Around the restaurant, people leaned in, meals momentarily forgotten, as David continued his story. Outside, the city began the long process of healing from wounds both visible and hidden, much like the man whose quiet refusal of a free meal had ultimately helped save them all. For in the end, it wasn't just about a homeless man turning down food. It was about a community discovering that sometimes the greatest gifts come from those we least expect to give, and that dignity, once recognized, has the power to transform not just one life, but many.